Good morning. Wanted to start off with a quick kind of pop quiz. So show of hands, who reached out to their mom this past weekend? Text, FaceTime, you name it. Hands up. Who are the good boys and girls? Yep, okay. Now keep your hands up. Who now can say that their mom with 100% certainty knows exactly what you do for a living? Your mom's a rock star. And that's the same case for me, right? And I've been in this space for about 10 years. I started at Right Media in 2005. And it's really apparent that confusion comes free. It comes in the mail. It comes in your email box with the newsletters that you get signed up for. So what I'm going to try to do today is talk through some frameworks and examples that I've used, that my colleagues use, to try to distill what programmatic can and can't do for brands, for publishers, for partners. Try to tee up where to get started, maybe some key aspects of what to think, kind of a test along the way to make sure you're progressing, and again, some examples. So it really does start with knowing your audience. And for those of us on the 9 a.m. flight from JFK to Austin, we went from being last-minute rental car shoppers in Dallas to low blood sugar, late lunch enthusiasts in Austin in a matter of minutes, right? And this notion of the audience will evolve over time is something that we have to grasp and understand, because what we have today, the wealth of data we have today, is actually going to get worse and more complicated over time, right? Our clothes, our wrists are going to be telling us information about ourselves that could be used in a marketing context. We'll likely log into our cars to update personal preferences or playlists that you want to have. The data is just going to continue to grow and grow. And unless we have a core foundation of knowing who our audience is, we'll be in trouble. Now, the audience challenge differs by brands, right? So large advertisers that market to the whole of the US have a very different problem than someone who is very niche and very targeted. And what I propose is that regardless of what kind of brand you are, you start with some elements of segmentation. And now segmentation helps to define who your customers are, but it also shrinks your problem down or your challenge down to a bit more manageable size. And the other thing that I want, the key within the segmentation and kind of learning who your core customers are and who you want to be marketing to, is to look at indexes versus kind of performance or conversion rates. And the reason why I say this is there are some audiences that naturally click, convert, take actions more than others, and they may not be your audience, right? And so the key question that you want to ask yourself while you're looking at your audience is, when the campaign starts and the performance doesn't necessarily look exactly how I was expecting it to, am I going to shy away from the audience that I know is the consumer that I want, the consumer that I should be marketing to, and go for the people who click and convert? The other thing that really helps when you know your own audience is when you can go into a meeting with a publisher or a technology partner and share that information with them. You come to the table with what you want versus sitting through the half-hour to hour sales pitch of what they think that you want to hear. And helping in that prioritization allows them to fill out and round out the picture of your customer, because you may not know everything about your customer, right? A DMP can help get you there, take you some steps there, but it's not going to necessarily tell you everything there is to know about your consumer, because they do a lot of other things that you just don't see. And so to give you an example, we work with an automobile advertiser, and they market to the US, but they have certain products that align more to maybe a green car consumer. So we took a look at people who were taking some of those activities and searching for green cars, hybrids, things like that, and then looked at what else are they doing. And there's some interesting things that can come up by looking at very granular data around search activity, around website activity, and what we found was there's this element of looking behind the scenes or wanting to do things yourself. So a DIY audience came to the forefront. They're looking at hows, they're looking at tutorials on home garden TV, but then there is also a financial aspect of kind of more of the day traders, people looking at Morningstar reviews, things like that where, again, if we just, it's kind of avoid the temptation of just the in-market segment, right? Think more holistically about your consumer, try to understand a bit more, which then leads to the relevance question. Now, we all talk about right ad, right time, right person, and this is the example. If for those who I haven't met at this conference, you may have met me in your inbox in December. I used some of my Starwood points to go to a concert, and I got my photo taken with Sheryl Crow. She is that short. And the key here is to understand what assets you have at your disposal that you can use to tailor messaging to that audience definition that you've already solidified, right? And here is where I think we talk about programmatic in two contexts, right? One is the way we probably got started with it. We were using an existing campaign, existing creative, existing measurement, and we were able to do it more efficiently, cheaper, better, faster, whatever it was. And that kind of is some of the legacy that we have with programmatic, where people can put it into a box and say, that's the only thing it's good for. But in reality, it's a completely different tool set that allows us to change the conversation that we can have with consumers. And so the starting point here is to really take that inventory, not only of the assets you have, but of the organization you have as well, and to understand where the decision makers sit for not only creative, for media, but kind of understanding that those silos that may exist that we may have to help blend and connect through. The way to test to make sure that you're progressing on this is to kind of always look from the consumer standpoint at any given moment in time, what are the activations I have in market, and does that make sense to them? Is there relevance? Is there a path? Is the message consistent? The example that we have for this one is an advertiser that, again, markets to the entire US. And what we found was using some of their own first-party data, and some of that was collected through surveys, like understanding brands that maybe don't have a digital presence. You can do some surveys to kind of build up a little bit of a pool of audience to then kind of map to broader context. We took that information, we did take some third-party data as well, and we started tailoring messages. Now, this wasn't dynamic creative that was, every creative was different. This was some components of creative that we would call more like programmatic creative. So we're assembling creative based upon the audience characteristics. And over the first 90 days, we saw a 22% improvement in purchase interest, purchase intent. So there is definitely a story to tell around relevance that usually really starts with creative and building out that relationship with the creative, either agencies or people on your teams to get there. Next comes value versus cost. And this is something that we're often challenged with, where the point solutions that you see, whether they charge on a CPM or they charge on a percentage, you're trying to figure out how, by using them, am I gonna do better than if I didn't use them? And here is where we say you got to start thinking about making your own currencies and setting new benchmarks for your media. And you don't necessarily have to wait for the industry to come and solve that problem for you. Industry standards can get a little political, right? 70% and 50% and 1 second and 3 seconds. You don't have to follow those. You can kind of take a leadership spot and start defining them for yourself. And so the way we get started is taking a look really at the cost. Cost still matters. Taking a look at the audience accuracy. So if we've really defined our audience, now we're going to look at how well are we reaching that customer, that consumer. We're going to look at viewability, and we're going to look at fraud. And if we really want to go for it, we'd also look at frequency, because we don't want to necessarily have partners that can hit the consumer multiple times, even if it's viewable and fraud-free. We want to have a holistic picture of that consumer. And so the example that I have here is with a retailer whose target audience is fairly broad. It's homeowners. And so what we did with them, instead of looking, again, just at cost, which is the classic procurement-driven, understanding apples to apples, are we doing better over time with getting things cheaper, kind of saying, are we getting better value for our media investment? And we took a look at an existing campaign that was purchased kind of with CPM in mind, and we kind of unfolded, well, who is actually the top performer in this campaign? And what we found is, as we overlaid audience, not too many people changed because that was already in kind of the planning process. But when we added in fraud and viewability and frequency, each time the top performer changed. So thinking about things holistically in the context that we have becomes really, really important. The two caveats that I have with value and cost is you'll hear a lot of industry benchmarks, and those are good places to start, but always check the denominator, right? So when people talk about 50% being fraud, are they just capturing every single impression out there that often is getting pre-filtered by many of the partners that we know and love? Conversely, if they're talking about match rates being in the 90% or fraud-free being in the 90+%, understand what percentage of traffic was used to kind of come to that metric, right? To understand the whole picture versus just a little snapshot. Right, I touched on the example. Go into the last one. So throughout this process, we've kind of created some boundaries for ourselves to kind of constrain exactly what we're trying to accomplish. And the reality is we can accomplish a lot, but we also need to have a good focus for what we want to do. We need to understand the risk that we have and the risk and the reward. Actually, it reminds me of the previous last bullet I was going to say, is understanding that risk and reward. It can be easy to simplify by simply saying, I want partners to guarantee me things like viewability and fraud and maybe some audience accuracy as well, OCR guaranteed. I'm not knocking any of those tactics, but I want people to recognize that by doing that creates a different incentive on that partner that made the guarantee, right? They now will be maybe a little bit risk adverse in trying to have a broader exposure to inventory and to audiences, and you may actually limit your reach and maybe massively increase your frequency. But back to the freedom within a framework, the keys here is to also understand what is a digital problem or what is a marketing problem versus what's a programmatic problem. So when we think about the measurement and the attribution, it's not programmatic's job to solve. And the reason why people in this room are often the ones who are being asked to solve it is because we're some of the smartest individuals at our companies and leaders in the industry. But I want us to be careful to say programmatic can do a lot. Let's again think about that audience that we're trying to reach. But some of those other aspects is a bigger conversation and not something that we need to tackle immediately. But in all these situations, think about going back to a home base, right? So I spent a lot of time thinking about and working with some of our global clients. And when you think about global with programmatic, the local laws are different, the data providers are different, the platforms are different. So kind of creating that foundational framework of how to do programmatic well and the characteristics we're looking for with programmatic is really, really important. And politicians actually do this really well, right? They call it going back to their home base. If you ask them a question about their voting record, they're going to talk about the threats on our doorstep. If you want to talk about the First Amendment, they're going to talk about religious values that our founding fathers had. So if you can think to yourself, whenever you're meeting with a partner, what are my core foundational components? What's my home base? How do I help them help me? I think programmatic becomes a lot simpler for us and for them. So quick recap, right? Prioritize your point of view, right? Everybody has their own point of view. You want to know yours first to help influence them and keep that open mind. Other people know a lot data that you actually may not have access to. Elevate programmatic just from that doing what we've done, but doing it a little bit better, to kind of the strategy point, right? And creative is, I think, the biggest challenge, or the biggest missed opportunity that we haven't taken advantage of yet, and is something to lean into right now and today. Last, create your own currency, right? And this can be customized, it can be really in-depth. It doesn't have to go as far as maybe I described it, but kind of evolving the conversation to not just being cost, but cost and a quality element. Set those benchmarks and use that to help dictate, even if a platform is more expensive, they actually deliver better value for me. And the last, expect change, right? Again, what's a programmatic problem? What's a marketing problem? Consumers have more opportunity than they've ever had to engage with brands, to make purchase decisions. You have to just kind of embrace those differences and embrace that it is going to change in the future. But begin to make this kind of part of your culture, that we're going to always be asking questions. We're going to be looking for more. And with that, I appreciate it. See you guys soon.